All right, so welcome to Porsche Bikes. This is the complete history of Porsche bicycles, 1893 to 2024. So Porsche's made bikes for over, as you see here, from 1996 to 2024. But the history actually goes back more than 130 years to 1893. So the things I'm going to cover today, it's 49 slides, excuse me. So these are all bikes that were designed by Porsche. These are not relabeled bicycles from other brands. These are actually designed and spec'd and commissioned by Porsche. They include quality components. They were made in limited quantities. And as I mentioned a second ago, the history goes back to 1893. Yeah, so I'm going to reference this chart. This chart here on the left is something that's available on the Porsche Bike Facebook group page. So if you're interested in seeing this complete history, this chart, just go to Facebook, go to Porsche Bike Group Facebook page and request access. And then once you're in, you're into the group page, the very top, there's a link to the files section, and you'll see a whole bunch of different files in there, and this Porsche Bike history chart will be in there. So I'm going to reference this and from top to bottom in different segments. I'm not going to go over each one of these pages because I have slides that shares each bike. So, but you'll see that that chart has a complete history, and as it gets updated, as new bikes come out, I update that and keep that on the group, keep it current. So, as I mentioned, the first e-bike was in 1893. So the first Porsche-made e-bike was way back in 1893. So that's not a typo, over 130 years ago. So what happened was young Ferdinand Porsche, he was 18 years old, and he was quite a genius back then. And he actually, at 18, he wired his parents' house with electricity to have lighting. And so when he was 18, he was working at a electric company in Austria, in Vienna, Austria. And so when he was working there, he worked during the day, and then at night he would head over to the local university, and he would, what they call sneak listen. He wasn't officially enrolled. He would sneak into these classes and listen and take these electrical classes and mechanical engineering classes without being fully enrolled. But he would have to run between work and Vienna every evening to take these classes, and it just was not a good use of his time, he thought. And so he actually found a bicycle that was by his apartment that wasn't being used, and he bought that bicycle from a neighbor, and he fixed it up, repaired it, and repainted it black. And from where he worked, he actually borrowed a motor off a test assembly and put that on the bike and turned that into an e-bike. So this was in 1893. The first patent for an e-bike in the world was in 1895. So this was a couple of years before the first patented e-bike. So he made this shiny black bike into the world's first e-bike. This paragraph is on a website for a museum in Austria that honors Ferdinand Porsche. It's also, this paragraph's also at the museum. So if you're at the museum, you stumble across this statement, it's kind of kind of mind-blowing that all these years ago, Ferdinand Porsche's first vehicle was an e-bike. So he called this e-bike the Octagon because it had an octagonal rear wheel motor. It's tough to say that word. And so he called this the Octagon. So at the beginning, he made this bike. It was just out of necessity. He just wanted to get to these classes. But it became a huge talking point at this company. So the company was looking at this bike saying, this is pretty cool. And it all started with this Octagon motor that just came off a workbench. So I'm going to make a very bold statement here. I believe that Porsche, as it is today, the car company, wouldn't be around if it wasn't for that e-bike. We wouldn't have Porsche sports cars. We wouldn't have Porsche SUVs. You know, we wouldn't have Porsche race cars. There would be no Porsche car company if it wasn't for that first bike. That's a pretty bold statement, but here's my thinking behind that. So this octagon motor that Ferdinand Porsche used, this electric motor that was not intended for a bicycle, became the beginnings of the very first fully electric car ever made. So at 25, a few years later, Ferdinand Porsche made the very first fully electric car, and it used these hub motors that were also the octagon motor. So the very first car Porsche ever built, and he etched the letter um, letter and number P1 on this car. It was the first thing he designed. So he made this car, the very first e-car with these octagon electric motors, and that's what got him into into the whole designing of cars. If it wasn't for that, there was a possibility that maybe he would have just stuck with the electrical engineering portion of it and continued to work at this company and just focused on electrical and electrical engineering and never got into automobiles. So the very first Porsche bicycle was an electric bike that launched the very first the very first electric car. And then after this, Ferdinand Porsche, after he designed the first electric car, he designed the first hybrid, where he put a internal combustion motor on one of these electric cars to drive the electric motor. So he didn't have to have these huge batteries to power the electric motors. And that launched him into designing cars and race cars, and then of course everything that happened after that. So fast forwarding from 1893 to 1978. Does everybody still see the slides okay?
Yeah, correct. I can see the picture.
Excellent, thank you. So fast forward to 1978, Porsche Design got involved and designed a concept bike, an ultralight racing bike, and that was branded. It was named the Austro Daimler as a nod to Ferdinand Porsche's early beginnings. That was one of the car companies he worked for, and Ferdinand created race cars, street cars for them. And so the designers at the Austrian center there, Porsche Design offices, designed this concept study. It was a lightweight racing bike that featured, it was a fully composite frame, and it was ultra lightweight, and it had state-of-the-art back in 1978 components, and it was a super light bike. A friend of mine was visiting this office and saw this bike on the wall and took a picture of it and sent it to me, and I had never heard of that bike, so I contacted Porsche Design, and they sent me this photo here on the left. This is the photo my friend sent me, and then this is a studio photo. When I asked, is there any way we can get a photo of this, they took it off the wall and put it in their studio and took this picture. So this picture is not widely published. I shared this in the group, but if you look at it, it's just a crazy cool bike, and it was part of Porsche Bike's history. And how it's significant is Porsche Design, and I'll mention this later in the presentation, but Porsche Design now designs all of the bicycle frames for Porsche. So this was the first Porsche designed bicycle that led to the relationship that we have today with the new bikes. The other thing I'll mention is this is black. So not unlike the very first Porsche e-bike that Ferdinand Porsche did in 1893 that was painted black, this is also painted black, and you're going to see that quite a bit through this presentation. Then next up, in 1991, the engineers at the Weissach R&D Center in Germany, they came up with a another bike, and of course it's black. So this was the 1991 Porsche Bike Spider 9.85. The 9.85 references the weight of the bike. So that's its official name, the Porsche Bike Spider 9.85. They made this one bike, it was a prototype, and they featured that in the Christophorus magazine in May 1991. So this is a page out of that magazine. And I've got the pages of this magazine also shared on the Facebook group page. And in that magazine, it states, this is a paragraph from that magazine, and the author's down at the bottom there. His point was, is since a lot of the engineers in Weissach were, cyclists and bike fans, it was just a matter of time before they would work on a bicycle there at the R&D. And as the author stated, it would be the 911 RS of mountain bikes. Pretty bold statement, but that was his comment. And they wanted to build a bike that was lightweight and it looked good, had a good shape to it, and then of course it would function as a sturdy and true mountain bike. And the result was this bicycle. The two gentlemen that kind of led the charge, Dr. Ulrich Bates, he was the head of Porsche R&D at Weissach at the time in the late 80s. And he was heavily involved in this bike. He still is a big cyclist. And to prove that that bike had the merits of a true bike, he took that prototype bike and rode it across Pakistan. And he still has that bike today. So there's a photo on the left of him across riding in Pakistan, and then on the left, excuse me, and then on the right is him today with that same bike at his house in Austria. So he kept that bike and keeps it in good shape and still rides it. The Porsche Bike Spider 9.85 from 91. At the end of that story, Porsche mentions in that magazine that they were going to make 300 of those bikes. And after that story was published, I had never heard or seen that bike again for many, many years. And then one day, a couple of us looking for Porsche bikes found that on eBay there was one of those bikes for sale. And then all of a sudden, I thought they must have made those 300, but in reality, they only made 50. And getting a hold of Dr. Bates and finding out the history of the bikes, he mentioned that they were hoping to make 200 of the 300, but ended up only making 50. And that one that we saw on eBay in Germany was number 37. And a bunch of us pitched in and bought that bike, and it's now on display on the wall at the PCA, the Porsche Club of America office in Columbia, Maryland. And when that bike was purchased in Germany, Dr. Bates, he's on the right there, we sent that bike to his house in Austria, and it had a photo shoot with him and his son Fabian, and they had that bike there, and they took pictures of it and autographed the paperwork that came with the bike before it was sent to the office, the PCA office. So these are photos that no one's ever seen before. They're on the right where Dr. Bates's personal photographer was taking pictures of the bikes. So that was the early years, the first Porsche bicycles that started the whole process. Then in 1996 through 2000, 2003, 2004 was what became the Votech years. So Porsche wanted to get back into the bike market after that first design there in Weissach, the Porsche Bike Spider. So a few years later, Porsche decided they wanted to get into making Porsche bikes on a worldwide level. And Bernard Kuick, the gentleman on the left there, was working with Porsche and with Votech to produce these bikes. This is a photo of Bernard and Walter Röhrl, the famous rally drivers wearing yellow. This was at one of the Porsche bike release events. So Porsche wanted to make these bikes, and Bernard worked with Votech to design these bicycles and mass produce them and sell them globally. So this is the very first rendering, the very first illustration of what the design would be for these new bikes. So Lutz Schaffer created this drawing in 1995, working with Bernard, Porsche and Votech, and said, "This is the bicycle we would like to sell globally." So the first Porsche bike mass produced was the bike FS. This was the design, and we'll talk about the FS here for a couple of minutes. The bike S that we all know, the red bike that's probably the most readily seen. The bike S, the hardtail version of this, was designed after the FS. The FS was the original concept of Porsche bikes, and then the S came along to provide a bike that had a hardtail, maybe sold for a little less. So this is from Bernard's collection in Germany. It's quite rare to see this. It's the first drawing. You'll notice, if you can see my cursor, this bar goes all the way through to the down tube. That's significant because the design element made it into the original release of the Porsche bike FS. So FS stands for full suspension. So the bike FS is full suspension. The bike S is for suspension because it's just got front suspension. So these Votech bikes are well known because of their elastomer fork design. The Votech team took that inspiration for that design for motorcycles. They wanted it to be very robust and reliable and can handle big bumps. So they wanted a design that was more like a motorcycle. The bike FS for 1996 had full rotor disc brakes, had some proper gearing, and then it had this unique frame design that you hadn't seen anywhere else. And anybody that's ridden one of these bikes will tell you they handle really well. And it's something to do with the geometry of the frame. It's kind of got a low center of gravity, handled very well for a bike in 1996. So if you have a bike FS and you're wondering what year it is, this cross beam here identifies it as a bike FS from 1996. You'll notice that as the bike evolved, the frame changed a little bit. The frame geometry is still the same, but you'll notice that cross beam is gone and this lighter support came into play. Still has the full shocks, still has rotor disc brakes, the brake rotors themselves, and the calipers were upgraded each year to something a little more high tech as bike parts evolved. So when you got to 99, you'll notice that this frame piece changed a little bit and the color changed. So it started out black, which there's that color again, that kind of honors the first bikes. And then it went to gray, and then it went to blue. And then you'll notice that at this point in 2000, not only did the FS change a little bit, in terms of shape, but this bar is now bent instead of welded, but it actually gave you 3 different points of adjustment for the rear shock, where it did not have that in the first versions. So now you can make some adjustments. And then the very last of the bike FS from Votech had a nice red color. So these bikes did change over the years a little bit here and there, but more or less stayed pretty consistent with the original design. And then the bike S, we're all familiar with this. So the bike S was the hardtail version, had the same forks up front, cost a little less than the FS, and that was also made from 96 or excuse me, 96. Actually, there's a bike S version that went all the way to today, but I'll show you that one here in a bit. But the original bike S with Votech came in different colors. It originally was Guards Red, and then they had a white version, a gray version, and then they made 150 of an orange, the 150 painted orange, which is super rare to find. That was the rarest of all the Bike S, but the Bike S was the most mass produced of all the different bikes. When it comes to frame sizes, there's published two different sizes. The Bike S came in small and large, and you can kind of identify by looking at it. The frame size is the small is 46 centimeters, large is 51. But a lot of times, if somebody's selling one, or if you got one in your garage, you don't know, where am I supposed to measure to figure that out? It's actually quite easy to look at them and tell. The small has this smaller triangle. The large has this larger triangle. So if you're looking at it, you could just look and say, okay, that's obviously the bigger of the two. This one's got a small triangle here, so it's a small. But during the production, there was one change that we cannot seem to identify anywhere in published material. If you look here, this head tube is actually taller than the large. The top tube and the down tube almost connect in both bikes. Here, there's a gap here. And this creates this taller front end of the bike. And even though it's published that they made us, two different sizes, 46 and 51, this bike frame's actually a little larger than this one. So I call this the large frame. I call this small, medium, and large, because this technically, if you measure it, it's a bigger frame than this one. But it's not published as such. I happen to have one of these bikes, and I have one of these bikes. And so this one is a little larger than that one, but as I said, it's not published as a third size, which is kind of interesting. In 1997, so we had the Bike FS, the Bike S, were the first two bikes that were released. In 1997, Porsche and Votech made another concept bike that was created for a bicycle exposition in Germany in 1997. This was the infamous Porsche Bikester, and they made one bike and they brought it to this show. And according to Bernard and others, the people at the bike show really loved it and wanted to buy it, but the team at Votech were not big fans of this design. It was very expensive to make. It was all custom, handmade metal parts that made the bike very expensive to produce. The concept, the idea is basically a city bike, a commuter bike that you could use and have different riders at different heights be able to use it. You can very easily adjust the seat and the handlebars to different heights. So if you wanted to share a bike in a company or in a family, you could have one bike and you could adjust it to fit any rider. It was supposed to be comfortable. It was supposed to be all weather. It was just a kind of a different design that they came up with. But because of the cost to produce, Porsche never made that bike. It was one bike, one prototype, and then it disappeared to history. And then in 2023, some of the folks that work at the Porsche Museum in the archive area sent me this picture here in the bottom left, said, hey, we found this weird bike. What is this? And of course, I immediately recognized it as part of the Porsche Bikester. And so after many years of having no idea where that bike ended up, then all of a sudden it resurfaced as a history bike. It's actually labeled on the frame, Porsche history bike. It's in the Porsche archive in Germany. But the weird thing about it is some of these parts have been changed. The front forks that were on the original concept bike were changed to the forks that you see on the last Bike FS and Bike S models. And there's some changes, but you can see the rims are the same. The fenders have been changed. The frame is the same. The handlebars have been changed. So why that's been changed is still a mystery today. And then if you're a follower of Porsche bicycles, one of the most famous and one everyone loves is the Porsche Bike FS Evolution. So the FS model had an upgrade to this Evo version in 1998 through 2004, and it's known by its bright yellow color. It's very hard to find, very expensive, but it's a fantastic mountain bike. It was Porsche's best mountain bike at the time, probably still one of Porsche's best mountain bikes. So this was a air suspension, fully suspension mountain bike with carbon rims. These are carbon rims, and it was aluminum frame. And then in 2000, it changed to a carbon frame, carbon fiber frame. Maintained the same rims, but fantastic bicycle. In '99, Porsche then added the road bike to their list of bikes they sold. So again, FS, S, FS Evo, and then the Bike R. So the Bike R is its road racing Rennsport version. So the original '99 Bike R had an aluminum frame. Again, you can see that very similar design with the triangle, same frame geometry. Super light, 19-pound road bike, very, very fast. It had Shimano Dura Ace components, which were the best components of the late 90s. Those are the same components that won the Tour de France. So the Shimano Dura Ace is all titanium. So these bikes were not cheap. They were selling, their MSRP was $10,000 at the time. So they're very, very pricey bikes, but very well made, great components. This bike, white Bike R up here in the right-hand corner, this is a picture of the prototype that Votech made. So that's the very first Bike R before they were mass produced. So you can see this had different rims on the bike, different forks. But that was the very first Bike R. And then in 2000, they switched from 2001 from aluminum to carbon fiber. So it became a carbon fiber frame bike, very, very lightweight. Again, also had, you can get it in two different flavors. They had the Shimano Dura Ace, but they also had a version with the Shimano Ultegra, which costs a little bit less than the Dura Ace, but still quality components. And then the last of the Votech bikes, they saw, Porsche and Votech saw a market for more of a commuter bike, maybe more of a touring bike, something that you could put some luggage or supplies, a backpack on to ride around town. So they turned the Bike S into the Bike ST. So you could get a mountain bike, or you could get what this would be more of a commuter bike, a touring bike. So it had the frame off the Bike S, but if you really notice and you look at it, it's quite a bit different. It took a lot of the different elements off the Bikester and put it on the Bike S. So you have some fenders to keep you dry when you're riding. They were carbon fiber fenders. It had 700C rims, so it didn't have the 26-inch rims that the Porsche mountain bikes had. The FS, the S, the FS Evo all have 26-inch rims. The Bike R has 700C rims. So this Bike ST actually has the 700C, like they're basically road bike rims. Gives you a little faster rolling. And then you'll notice the adjustable seat post, like the Bikester, and the bike rack, like the Bikester. So it became more of a kind of a city bike, and they sold this for a few years. So I mentioned the company Votech. So Porsche commissioned Votech to help make these bikes and then ultimately produce them for a worldwide market. They were sold through Porsche dealerships worldwide. And then in the late 1990s or into early 2000s, Porsche moved all of its bike construction from Votech to Stork. Stork is another bicycle company in Germany. So the kind of the rumor was Votech had some financial troubles. I think either went bankrupt or closed down or had to scale back. I'm not quite sure what the actual story is, but Porsche still wanted to make bicycles, so they moved to Stork and made bikes for a few years. They continued to make the Bike S, the Bike FS, and the Bike R models, which you saw those slides here previously. And then they introduced a couple new bikes. They introduced the Bike CS, which was kind of an upgraded version of the Bike ST. So, I mentioned S for suspension and FS for full suspension. ST was more or less suspension touring. And then they changed the name to the CS, which was more or less a commuter suspension. So basically the same concept as the Bike ST. You'll see it's got the fenders. It's got the 700C rims. It's got the luggage rack. This one's got a suspension seat post. It is adjustable, but kind of a more traditional adjustment. It's got a seat post shock. It's got the front shocks. It's got a little taller, higher handlebars. So if you're looking at this from a global perspective, these bikes were all sold, worldwide. But when you got to the United States, by the time it got to the year 2000, they were no longer selling those Porsche bikes. So it's very rare to see anything beyond an S, FS, or a Bike R in the United States. The ST was not sold in the US. The Bike CS was not sold in the US. So most of these bikes, if you want one of these, you're going to have to order from Europe, Germany, in some cases specifically. So the other bike that Storic made that was unique in the 2000s was the Bike X. So this was what they called a recreation bike, is what the translation means from German. It also had a seat post shock. It had front shocks, but it was more of a road bike frame. So they called this a hybrid bike, hence the name X. It was a cross bike. It was a road bike frame with road bike rims, but it had mountain bike gearing, mountain bike tires, mountain bike handlebars. So it was almost a 50-50 hybrid between a mountain bike and a road bike. But they called it a recreation bike. It was really just built to ride around town and get some exercise. So the Bike X, back to that black color, it's kind of identifiable by the color because there's not that many black bikes sold, and you see the road bike frame. I personally have one of these, and I've turned it into more of a touring bike, utilizing the mountain bike gears and the 700C rims. It's quite fast when you put a lot of weight on it. This is one of the recent rides we did, and of course these things can get very dirty, but that's what a Bike X looks like in touring mode, I call it. Then the next step is Porsche decided it wanted to up its involvement in bicycles, and it started working with the company Rottwild in Germany. And Rottwild again, is a bicycle manufacturer in Germany and makes a lot of bikes. And Porsche was looking for somebody to make a new version of bikes, and went from Storic to Rottwild. And from 2010 to just a couple of years ago, they made a whole line of Porsche bikes. These are again sold in the US through dealerships, and very common in the United States, but of course also worldwide. What's unique about these bikes is from the Votech days and Storic days is Porsche went back to Porsche design in Austria and said, design us a frame. Design us a bicycle that represents the Porsche cars. And so when Porsche Design came up with this concept, the idea was this would represent the silhouette of a 911 or a Porsche sports car. So it's kind of this rounded frame was the design Porsche Design came up with. So back to that early days of 1978, that road bike, racing road bike that Porsche designed, they kind of came back into the process in 2011 with these bikes. So you're gonna see some new bikes here, and you're gonna see one that's got an old name, which is kind of fun to see come back. But so the first Porsche bike in 2011 was the Porsche bike. If you get one of these, it's aluminum, it's hydroformed aluminum. It's got this really cool shape by Porsche design. It's got shocks in the front. It's got a belt-driven drive system, so that's not a chain. That's actually like a belt, like you would at one of our cars, which is kind of cool. And then they came out with the Bike S. So Porsche brought back the name Bike S from those Guards Red bikes from 1996. This is also aluminum frame, like the first bike, but they removed the front shocks and use solid, rigid forks, and same belt drive. These are great little kind of commuter bikes, beach bikes, riding them around. It's got, kind of thicker tires, so it's comfortable to ride, and just a really great bike. Then the next version up, Porsche made the Bike RS. So for Rennsport, this is a same shape of the frame, and kind of same design, but when you look at it, it is visually it looks the same, but when you pick up the bike, you'll notice it's quite a bit lighter. So this is a carbon fiber frame, carbon fiber forks, carbon fiber seat post, carbon fiber handlebars. It's all carbon. It's super lightweight. It weighs I think it's like 19 pounds, maybe a little lighter. And that's pretty light considering it's got little fatter tires on it for a little comfortable ride. It's got this one's got a full drivetrain, so it's not just the belt drive with a few gear options. This is a full Shimano drivetrain, so you have a lot of options for gears. The first RS came out in 2011. It was this gray color, and then through the years they changed the colors. They had a almost like a chrome silver version, and then they had a black frame. There's that black frame again with lava orange accents. I don't know if you can see in this picture, but the gray frame has these kind of iodized blue components, just gorgeous blue highlights, and then the black frame had the lava color highlights. So just gorgeous bikes. And then Porsche also made the Bike RX, which was the mountain bike version. Again, same frame design from Porsche design. This had a little different gearing, had front shocks, DT Swiss shocks. So this was the mountain bike version. So the RS is the street version. The RX is the mountain bike version of the carbon fiber frame. So this one costs a little less than the Bike RS, but as cost goes, the Bike and the Bike S were the economical, if there's such a thing for Porsche, and then the Bike RS carbon fiber upgrade and the Bike RX carbon fiber upgrade, they were more. You still with me, Dave?
I'm still here.
Okay, excellent. Just making sure this is working. So Porsche made these bikes from 2011 to 2021. They stopped making these in 2021. You can still find, every once in a while, you can still find a new one for sale at a dealership, but those are really hard to find these days. The used bike market, there's a few out there on eBay every once in a while, but they're hard to find. People that bought them tend to keep them. So the next step in this whole journey, the history of Porsche bikes, is Porsche then said, you know what, we got this e-bike, phenomenon, occurring across the globe. Seems like the e-bike industry is exploding, and Porsche thought we should, jump into the e-bike market as well. And I think it's fascinating because it ties back to that very first Porsche e-bike made in 1893. So it's kind of fun to see Porsche go full circle with e-bikes. So this was just recent history now. In 2019, they started making some e-bikes, and again, these frames were designed by Porsche Design Studio FA Porsche in Austria. So again, that tie back to the 1978 design. Porsche Design is involved. When the very first e-bike the first prototype was made. That was in 2010. They made the Porsche Bike RS Hybrid. They made two versions of that. Made two bikes basically. It was a green one and a white one. They made two prototypes of this Bike RS Hybrid, and it was basically just a mountain bike with an e-motor and a battery pack just attached to kind of start testing components. And then Rotwell got involved and made that bottom e-bike there on the left. And if you see that on the left there, it looks like the Bike RX from the Rotwell release from 2011 to 2021. So very, very similar shape. You can see the silhouette of the Porsche sports car in that, but the down tube is wider and it's got an electric motor in it. So that was the next prototype that was made to test out this whole thing. And then the big picture of the silver bikes with the blue rims, those ended up on a, and I'll share this slide here. That photo there was on a 2018 Mission E-Cross Turismo announcement. They were announcing the Mission E. It was a prototype of basically the Taycan Cross Turismo. It was a Mission E prototype, and it had this little picture of these bikes. And at the time, I didn't know what they were, but it turned out that if you look at the frame design, that is what became the e-bikes in 2021. So all these years later, you ended up with that same design. You can see the top and the head tube and the down tube. It's all very similar in design. This back, the chainstay, and this back portion of the frames very similar to this. Obviously, some changes took place because they added shocks, so it's not exactly the same. But this picture in this press announcement caught my eye back there in 2018, and then I didn't see anything about that design until 2020, until again in 2021. But I would love to have this bike. I love the rigid forks. I like this handlebar. It's very space age looking, and again a belt drive. This would be really cool to find out where these bikes ended up. But these were the prototypes that were designed to launch these new models. And then I skipped over this one. The very first Porsche e-bike that was sold was in 2019. They called this the Porsche e-bike X Plus. And it was a very limited run, just 250 bikes sold. It was produced by Rotwell. These are all Rotwell produced bikes. But Porsche wanted to sell the first e-mountain bike and sold these very quickly. You do not find these for sale anywhere. They were very expensive, and the collectors that bought these have not let them out in the market yet. So when you get into the 2021 to 2024 bikes, this is the kind of the last segment of Porsche bikes produced. So they had several models. These were all carbon fiber frames. So again, designed by Porsche Design. This was the e-bike Sport. This was the first in the line. And again, you can see that same design from that prototype. And then they switched last year, I believe it was, to a black frame. Again, you got the black frame reference. And so that was like the entry level e-bike from Porsche. And again, these are not cheap bikes. So entry level is an interesting use of words, but that was their entry level. Then the next step up is the e-bike Cross. It had a little better components, cost a little bit more. And it started with a black frame and then went to silver. And then most recently, they have offered some upgrades. So this is the first time that Porsche Bicycles has allowed for paint to sample. So you can actually choose different colors now rather than just the colors that they offer. So this was the Porsche e-bike Cross Performance EXC, and this is their current line. And you can get this in Ruby Star, Neo, ice green metallic, mamba green metallic, carmine red, shade green metallic, and shark blue. So some really gorgeous colors. So if you really want to have your Porsche bike match your Porsche car, now you truly can do that. And then there was some other anomalies that kind of took place in the Porsche bike world that aren't well known. These are only sold in Germany. You don't see these in the United States. But Storic, you might recognize that name. That was from the early 2000s. Porsche and Storic got back together again and designed a new line of bicycles, and actually came up with a new name. The brand is Cycler, and Storic and Porsche Digital made these bikes. They're still for sale today. And you can get basically a city bike, which is like a crossover. You can get a gravel version. You can get a more of an urban version. And I just absolutely love the frame design on these. I love the gravel bike. I would love to have one of these. These are all e-bikes. They're using the FAZU drive system, which we'll reference that company here in a second. And it uses Porsche digital technology. So it actually has a ride dashboard, reverse cam. So you can put your phone on your bike and you can see out the back. You can see all your navigation on your phone dashboard, and it communicates through the bike and records everything for you. So very, very cool concept that a lot of folks don't know about, that I bet you will see will blend into the next generation of Porsche bikes. Speaking of, and we're almost done here, that's the history of Porsche bikes, but what's next? You know what? This can't be the end of the Porsche bike history. So actually, listening to what's happening, talking to some of the folks in Germany, what's happening at Porsche when it relates to bicycles, I think the future is even more exciting than the history. And what's happened the last few years as Porsche's bought up some bicycle companies. So Porsche bought FAZU, if I'm pronouncing these things right. My apologies if I've mispronounced any names. But they fully acquired this company that makes drive systems, e-bike drive systems. They also fully acquired a company called Grape Bikes. Grape out of Croatia makes e-bikes and bicycles. Porsche has bought both of those companies and has started and formed a new company called Porsche e-bike Performance. And that was founded in August 2022. So I happened to run into some of the guys that work for Porsche e-bike Performance at the Sea Otter Classic in Monterey, California earlier this year, when I took my Bike R there to ride. And so of course I had to take a picture of them with my Porsche bike and talk to them about the latest Porsche bike developments. And it's stated on their website that they have a mission to lead developments in the e-bike market and transform mobility. The transform mobility is it's also a common theme in their cars and vehicles on the road. So their bikes and their cars the development and the marketing tend to blend. And what their intention is over the next few years is they want to develop these lightweight drive systems for agile e-bikes. So they want to have the cutting edge e-bike drive systems. Right now, e-bikes are considered pretty heavy. Porsche e-bike Performance, their goal is to make these things super light. You can have them in your bike, you can take them out. So they make your bike way lighter and a lot more fun to ride. And their goal is to sell these on the market. So you can buy a Porsche bike with a Porsche e-bike motor, or you could get a different brand. Who knows? Maybe someday Trek will have a Porsche drive system in it. So their intention is to market these to more than just Porsche bikes. And then, of course, they want to make more Porsche bikes. And they're scheduled to have a new release of Porsche bikes, what they say mid-decade, which mid-decade could be next year. I think we'll start seeing new Porsche bike designs next year, probably for sale in 2026 and beyond. So we'll see a whole new line of Porsche e-bikes coming out to replace the current versions that are sold today. So I've mentioned Porsche design several times through this, you know, from that first 1978 design to the designs of the RS and RX, and then of course the e-bikes. The folks at Porsche Design are really good to the bicycle community, the Porsche bicycle community. They're a great place to buy the bikes. I always reference them. You know, if you want to buy one of these new bikes, if you want to buy an old bike, you got to go to eBay or Craigslist or something, or Facebook Marketplace. If you want a new bike, go to Porsche Design. They also have provided test rides at a variety of Porsche events, and you know, bring the e-bikes out, and Porsche enthusiasts get to ride them. So they're a good group to work with. The last couple slides, I'd like to mention that there's more than just the bicycles that have kind of popped up in the Porsche bike world. They've got accessories. So if you want a Porsche bike rack for your Porsche car to put your Porsche bike on, of course they sell those. They've sold Porsche bike jerseys. This is a Porsche bike shirt from the Porsche Bike S release in 1996. A friend of mine has this shirt, and I keep begging him to give it to me, and he won't do it. But they sold bikes even back to, or accessories even back to 1996. A lot of the Porsche catalogs in the 90s, when they started selling the bikes, they sold bike covers, bike helmets, as I mentioned, bike jerseys. So if you wanted to be fully decked out in Porsche bike stuff while you're riding your Porsche bike, they sold accessories, water bottles, etc. And the last slide I want to mention is, which I think is the coolest part of all this, is all of this history has been embraced by a very small group of people across the globe, across the world. There's a group of Porsche bike enthusiasts, and our Porsche bike group on Facebook, I think we've got, what, 430 some now. And that's where we kind of share our passion for Porsche bikes. So this group of 400 plus, you know, we share the rides that we do. We share the bike collections that we have. We share maintenance and upgrade best practices, ideas. So we'll share how to take these things apart, put them back together. We share how our bikes look. Mark Falkenberg has the biggest Porsche bike collection in the world, a great display. Bao Khan in Vietnam he's right behind Mark. I think it was the second slide I showed, Luke Ragnar has the third largest, but those three gentlemen are neck and neck there for the checkered flag with their amazing bike collection. And then we've got groups that ride our Porsche bikes. As I mentioned at the beginning, these bikes are quality bikes. They're built to last. They're not cheap, whether it's cost or in components. And to prove that, there's groups of us that ride our bikes. This is the Washington, D.C. to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania ride that was 6 days long. It was 300 and how many miles was that? 370 miles. This was the Erie Canal ride that was almost 400 miles across 6 days. So if these bikes were toys and cheaply produced, they would never make these epic long rides. So they're great bikes, whether you want to collect them, restore them, or ride them. They're a lot of fun, and I think our efforts across all these years have proven that. So like I said, I was going to make a couple of real big, bold claims as I wrap this up. I think that if it wasn't for that first e-bike that Ferdinand Porsche made in 1893, if that bike wasn't so popular at that company, I don't think they would have given him the green light to make that first electric car, which then evolved to that first hybrid car, which then it turned into all the car designs he made. So maybe all these years later, if it wasn't for that first Porsche e-bike in 1893, there wouldn't have been Porsche cars. And the other bold statement is these are great bikes, and look at the history, look at all these different designs and components and colors, and the fact that you can ride these things for miles and miles on end, and they perform well. They're great bikes. So thank you everybody for watching this. If you're new to Porsche bikes and you see this and you want to know more, jump into that Facebook group. You'll see a lot of folks that can answer your questions. But while we're here, are there any questions from the group in the session?
Jim, George Hill. I had thought that the Porsche Bike S frames were made by Magura. Was it just the brake components, or were the frames made by them?
Very good question. So Magura only made the brakes on the S, and then they started making the brakes for, I think it's the historic bikes also. The RS and the RX have Magura brakes, and then the new e-bikes have Magura brakes, and some versions of the e-bikes actually have Magura forks, actually have Magura shocks. But that first aluminum frame with the S and the FS Evo, and Bike R, those were actually designed by Porsche, Bernard and the Votech guys, and were actually made by Votech. So those are not Magura frames.
Thank you.
That makes sense?
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, and I heard some stories that, the team that welded those bikes in Germany, they were welding those things as fast as they could because they were, there was a lot of bikes sold. Not a lot of bikes by let's say Trek standards, but the Votech team made, I think it was just over 10,000 bikes in that short time from 1996 to 2000. So they were welding like crazy. Any other questions?
That was a good presentation when you were going over the frame sizes on the bike. Yes, I brought mine. You photoed mine up. I've had it 2 years. I actually have the larger frame.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. So I learned something there.
Yeah. And let's see here. I'm going to turn off the screen so we can see each other. The one of the guys in the Facebook group in Germany is the one that highlighted to me that they've only published 2 different sizes. I was going under the assumption that there was 3 sizes because I had a friend of mine's small size frame at my house, and I took a picture with small, medium, and large, and I was like, they made 3 sizes, and this gentleman in Germany pointed out they've only published 2 sizes. So what's that 3rd size? So I asked Bernard, what is this 3rd size? And he said he didn't know. It's like when they were welding them, maybe they just said, let's make these a little bigger. So some of this history is still, we're still learning as we go.
So if they, this is Joel, if they were to make that head tube bigger than out of necessity, they would have had to make the fork tube bigger to accommodate the larger head tube, which then would have possibly made the steer tube would have been longer, but maybe even the fork tubes were a little bit longer again to maintain geometry. So one thing leads to another, to another, to another. So that's really an interesting little bit of change that they did. Not just, let's just make the head tube bigger, because the steering tube's bigger, possibly the fork tube's so long. Everything possibly might have had to grow in order to accommodate that. So
yeah, I'm with you, Joel. It had to be a conscious effort. It wasn't just like, oh, hey, we got this piece of aluminum here, let's just use this.
Well, maybe like it was like let's try this, and it was probably an idea that maybe they had kicking around, and decided to implement it. But I find that it was interesting. The other thing I find about these bikes is, through the years as they've gone, is, and I really, being a bike guy, obviously I have my favorite component groups and whatnot, but it's the collection of pieces and parts and components that they chose for these bikes. Sometimes it just doesn't sometimes it doesn't compute in my brain. Obviously there was a look that Porsche is looking for because it's Porsche brand, and I think a lot of that influenced component selection. But
Well, I
Anyway,
think it probably did, and it probably also there's probably some conscious effort of what they wanted, but there's probably also some effort with what they could get. Like the Magura brakes on the Bike S. I mean, those things are so robust. They have amazing stopping power, and just the coolest thing. And so I imagine that was a conscious effort, to have that. But rim brake, it just seems a little weird. But they had disc brakes on the FS, but maybe they thought would have something different between the two. But some of it, I think, was what they could source, close to where they were making them. So Magura is a German brand, and the original Bike S and FS, the first year had Sachs gears and Sachs brakes on the FS. And I think that part of that was because that was what was close. But then I think they realized that some of these components coming from Japan, Shimano specifically, were better. And then they started switching away from Sachs to Shimano. And I think as they were selling bikes, they realized they needed to, have the best components, and it wasn't just limited to what was in Germany.
yeah, it's interesting. Like I said, and well, back in the late 90s, back then, like you were talking about the brakes, the Magura hydraulic brakes for mountain bikes that was kind of cutting edge. So and I remember seeing that on the Bike S way back when at Porsche Design. And that was cutting edge back then. And I mean, I have a Cannondale Tandem that has Magura rim brakes on it. And believe me, they stop as well as any disc brakes that I've ever had.
I've actually flown over my handlebars on my Bike S twice because I jammed on the brakes too hard, and the bike just stopped, and I just went, woo! And you'll notice on the Bike S, the first year, they didn't have adjustments for the brake levers. And then in 97, they added those little red star wheels where you can actually adjust on the fly. So if you're going down a hill and you want more braking power, or if you want less braking power, you can adjust those while you're riding. And yeah, so little adjustments in the bikes as they developed over years.
Hey Jim, this is Tom. I wanted to add a little bit on the newer bikes in the U.S. The Fazo motor is available right now on the Santa Cruz Skitch. So that's the only bike I think in the U.S. you can buy that motor. But it's got really great reviews in terms of being light, powerful, and really quiet, which is the things that you want. And so I've been looking at that to try and maybe evaluate that motor. And then I think you said the Cycler name was created by Porsche, but Cycler was a company that was also a company that Porsche bought. They bought three companies, I thought, in the last couple of years, and Cycler was one of those. And so I'm pretty excited about what the next generation of bikes is going to be. So,
Oh, me too. Yeah, and it's fun to see Porsche kind of dabble in these things. So Cyclers with Storic, and Porsche Digital is heavily involved in that. Porsche Digital hasn't done anything in bikes at all, but with Cycler, they're involved in that. So in that camp, you have that development taking place. And then the Fazoo drive systems, they're making those and selling them into different bike, manufacturers, and that's available. And you can see how that's developing. And then, you got the current Porsche design e-bikes that's sold at the dealerships. Those actually have Shimano components, e-motors, but Porsche design frame, and they're dabbling in that. And then you got this new company that's kind of putting it all together, Porsche e-bike performance, where, to your point, Tom, I suspect you're going to see what they've learned, and all these different things are all going to come together with this new line. And that's exciting. So I'm hoping they have the Porsche digital piece, the ultralight drive systems, the Porsche design frame. I'm hoping it all comes together and we get to see that. And that could be the most robust Porsche bike, development ever. Even through all the stuff we've seen so far, to date, this could be the biggest effort. So pretty cool seeing where it's going. But it won't be cheap. It won't be cheap. So, Tom, you have to buy the first one and tell us what you think.
okay.
Take one for the team. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, any
Well,
other
thanks, Jim, for
questions?
thanks, Jim, for doing this. It's awesome.
Oh, thank you. Sorry it didn't start out well. I'll just cut off the first part and when we start it over so we can share that piece of it. But yeah, it seems like we've collected a lot of info and I just didn't want to keep all this in my head. I wanted to share it with everybody and you know, have this on YouTube so other people that find these bikes will be able to learn from the history.
Well, I thought it was a really good presentation, even though when we went through the practice thing, I'd seen the slides, but it went really well. And, you know, I actually learned several things about the bikes. So
Yeah.
thank you for doing it.
Thank you,
Cool.
Jim.
All right, you guys all have a good weekend.
All right, thanks. That was good. I enjoyed
All
it.
right. Everybody have a good weekend.
All right, see you. Bye.